Hi there, welcome to my presentation for Social and Cultural Contexts of Education, an overview of the key issues we've looked at so far, being social class and inequality, gender, and cultural difference and identity. We are going to frame these by looking at the macro factors, the big ideas around these concepts, how it plays out in the local Australian context, the influence that has on education policy and practice, and the relevance to me as a new and beginning teacher of all these things. So to start with social class and inequality, the big ideas, what are they? Well, social stratification, the idea that people in society are grouped into classes. Maybe it's the working class and the capitalist class. Maybe it's an upper class, middle upper class, or working class. Whichever way that you want to view these classes, the common thread is inequality. The example given there is about the different salaries that people within the same company might earn. And this social stratification is reinforced by the ideology of the particular nation or state or location, whether it's capitalism or neoliberalism or socialism, whatever it is, which is realised on the ground through the discourse that people use, the way we act, talk, behave, dress, interact. The counterforce to all this is, of course, social mobility. So the fact that people can move between these classes that are formed within society, up or down within a generation or across different generations. So how do those big sort of ideas look in the Australian context? Well, we like to view ourselves as a meritocracy here in Australia, so we might not talk explicitly about the social classes. We might talk about a disadvantaged area or a low socio-economic area, and that might just be nothing to do with the classes people were born into and the privilege or the wealth that was already there for them. It might just be to do with the fact that they're not using their ability or their talent, or they're not working hard enough, and that's why they're in these disadvantaged areas or so forth. A reason why we might talk that way about Australia, use that kind of discourse here, is because we have seen change throughout our education systems over the past 100 to 150 years of the access to education being quite low to now being accessible to all. But even as equality in education may have increased, we can still see that equity perhaps hasn't, and that that social stratification has been reflected through things like streaming, or the way that we value certain subjects, or standardized testing, or in the modern day Australia, this knowledge-based economy that we are trying to educate our young people to go out and find jobs into, and the long tail that we see, the big gaps between the high achievers and the lower achievers, or the social segmentation of schools in Australia, where most students will be going to a school that doesn't have a high mix of socio-economic status students there, and of course the fact that resources have been seen to be unevenly distributed across Australian schools. So what does that mean for the policy here? Well, despite the Melbourne Declaration saying that all young Australians should be developing these great attributes that our society deems as valuable through their education, we see that things like educational codes, or that hidden curriculum, may put up barriers to that happening. Something that Delpit would argue is influenced by the culture of power. So the dominant Australian culture, whatever that might be, is going to dictate what's in the curriculum and will frame what students and governing bodies will see as a good student or good learning. One way to sort of mitigate that for teachers might be to look at Bordeaux's social or cultural capitals and use that to our advantage by being aware of the different sorts of capital, not just economic, that students will bring to the classroom with them, but also being aware that their access to those different sorts of capital may be influenced by their, migration status, if they've just arrived, if they're the children of immigrants, and that kind of thing. So being aware of that is really important. So that brings us to how I want to use this as a new teacher. Well, first of all, addressing that culture of power here in Australia, talking about it with my students, what it is and how to be successful within it, but without undermining or undervaluing their individual cultures that they have. And to jump down to the last point there, one way to do that would be to recognise and value those things that Thompson's case study and their key readings defines as virtual school bags. which is sort of, I think, the cultural capital of Bordeaux was talking about. And this should be possible by employing a productive pedagogy. So Education Queensland has put out a pretty good document sort of talking about how to construct one of those pedagogies. So all in all, I want to be open with my students. I want to discuss how society is arranged, constructed in a way, how to be successful within it, but also maybe perhaps sort of question it. Look at how we might be able to change this social stratification that we do see and the inequality that we do see. So, moving on to gender. What are the big ideas? Well, gender can be seen as a social construct, so something that is to do with a community at a particular time, and it can change. Generally, it's also a social variable, so it's going to shape the kind of expectations and the directions that someone's life might take. Western feminism and queer theory have challenged sort of historic ideas about gender, as in, sex is biological, gender is not. It's not some inherent factor within us. It's something that we do often as a form of communication, and that things like heteronormativity need to be challenged and dismantled. Heteronormativity, of course, says that, there's man, woman, and they're heterosexual, and that's normal. Anything else besides that is unusual and can lead to an idea of what the ideal type of a man or woman is. If the kind of rules around the ideal type are broken, then we can lead into homophobia and bullying. So those big ideas in the Australian context, well, we can see quite a lot of them played out even just in the jobs that men and women are employed in Australia, being quite unequal, men often being given leadership roles, and in the schoolyard as well, the power and emotional relations between boys and girls, or amongst the genders, where we see boys bullying more than girls, and we see their interactions often kind of maintaining that dominant behaviour of boys. And within the culture of many organisations, we see being dictated by these kind of stereotypes or expectations of the roles that different genders will play and the activities that they might be involved in. So I should say the roles different sexes will have, or the activities different sexes will be involved in. And so how does that look in, school practice and policy? Well, the Sex Discrimination Act has been amended recently to include sexual orientation and gender identity, intersex status as things that people cannot be harassed about or discriminated against because of, which is great. Every state will have something like the Queensland document that I've mentioned here to ensure that things like bullying are addressed through responsible behaviour plans. Does it address the underlying issues that might be causing this bullying or discrimination is arguable. We can see that in a way things are not perfect. Not even 20 years ago there was the idea that boys were underachieving in schools because of the feminisation of teaching. Too many women teachers, female teachers, were leading to boys underachieving, despite the research showing otherwise. But I guess the hope here is that many teachers are reporting that they are degendering their classrooms, referring to their students as children, not boys and girls, things like that. Which does come with a caution, which we will discuss in how this all is relevant to me as a new teacher. So first of all, I'm really excited to work with young guys and talk about the kind of hegemonic masculinity often portrayed in society and media, and breaking that down and making a new definition of what that means. And that goes hand in hand with the sort of employment they might be going out to seek in the future. As far as degendering goes, the idea is do it, but don't do it to the point of making it appear like there is no issue. Leave room to explicitly address the theme of the issues of gender that we've been talking about. So as a whole, I want to open up the discussion for it. I'll have to do this with the support of my school and ensure that they have policies and guidelines on how these things are to be discussed with students, which issues can be taken on board in the classroom, which need to get referred on to, outside sources, of course. But the overriding idea is to, of course, no bullying or homophobia or heteronormatization is okay. Have to challenge all of it, and stereotypes, all that kind of thing. Even on rounds, I saw, sexist jokes being made by students and not being pulled up by the classroom teacher, which I'm really disappointed with and makes me very determined to not be that teacher from the outset. So if I can be doing those things, I think I'll be working towards being, building some better ideas in this country about gender. Okay, lastly, this thing runs out in 15 minutes, so I've got to fly through cultural difference and identity, the big ideas. Well, culture is not just material, the things that are produced, but also abstract, the way people think, and this is relative to a particular place or people. Multiculturalism is cultural diversity, something that Australia likes to talk about itself as being. We talk about the fact that nearly a quarter of Australians are born overseas as an indicator of our multiculturalism. Language is a large theme in culture, not just for the individual, but also for the society. Is it monolinguistic? Are we valuing one language higher than others? Are other languages valued at all? Immigration, of course, feeds into the multiculturalism of a location, but has influence through the policy that overrides that location. And not to focus on the doom and gloom, but I don't think we should talk about cultural difference and identity without talking about things like, issues we're seeing in society right now, Islamophobia and the victimization of Muslim people, which I would put into the macro factors, because when these play out into local context, yes, Australia has a short but very busy migrant history. The idea that really we're all migrants to this country besides Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that history has been littered with discrimination, the white Australia policy, this hierarchy of social Darwinism where maybe Caucasians were seen as being on top and Aboriginals were seen as on the bottom, the demonisation of certain groups of immigrants throughout the years, even caps on immigration of, say, Jewish people who escaping persecution during the 20th century to the issues we have with asylum seekers currently. There has been a change in Australia. We have seen a white Australia policy abandoned. We have seen the migrant tests becoming more fair, to the point where 20 years ago, 41% of Australians were immigrants or children of immigrants. And the issues that have come from that are the idea of the identity that these people or students in our schools will be sort of trying to navigate their mix of culture, language, religion and heritage, but still operating in a curriculum which has historically been based on capitalism and Christianity. I think a CARA national curriculum is challenging and changing that, which I think is great, but of course it's up now to the educational policy and practices to actually make that a realisation. So to dismantle the effects of cultural lag, where education systems often don't respond to a society changing fast enough, shown by the fact that many policies and programs you read about are all to do with learning languages, trying to move away from a monolingual society, but generally just based around forming strong economic ties with our nearest neighbours. It's why many of these languages are from the Asian region. And perhaps the counterforce to that would be things like Islamic schools, which have got rising enrolment rates over a 10-year period, and more Muslim students at Australian universities compared to the general population. So what does this all mean for me? Well, of course, be vigilant towards discrimination and bullying. Do not stand for it and address it. Supporting the teaching of languages is great, something I probably wouldn't have thought about before taking this unit, actually. Facilitating the mixing of students from different cultures. I'm from Melbourne, where it's quite a multicultural city, but what if I'm out in some rural school with predominantly a Caucasian population? How am I going to make that happen for my students? Being aware of the hidden curriculum in the school I'm teaching in, know where to direct my students who might be battling some identity issues towards different services, and the ideal speak situation is something that I have really taken to, and that in my classroom I'd love to talk about that and create this within my discussions. Being a geography teacher, I want to use group discussion a lot, but the idea that each participant has the common goal of reaching an agreement, and no one should ever assume they know more about somebody else's culture than they do. If I can start to do those things as a new teacher, I think I'll be on my way to becoming a really culturally sensitive teacher. So this is just an overview of my very simplified mind maps of these three issues, and there are my references for this presentation. Thank you so much.